You! Yes, I'm talking to you! You whiners who think that we don't have any rules for Spelljammer combat in the new Spelljammer setting. Let me guess, you also come out of your fully decked out walk-in closet shouting, "I have nothing to wear!" Here, take this dress that you just bought, the pair of shoes that match perfectly with said dress, and here's a purse that really isn't necessary, but fits with the outfit anyway. Now, let's have a dogfight in space. Before we get in today's video, I'm going to shout out one of our newest subscribers, Brian Hatchett. Welcome to the family. Without further ado, let's get on with today's video. Greetings, dear viewers, it is I, Drayhon, and welcome back to a raw guide to homebrew. Nope, wait. Messed that up. Welcome back to a raw guide to Dungeons & Dragons, where we take a look at the rules as written within Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition material to see what rules are necessary for certain things and what arguments can be settled just by reading a rule book. Today we are taking a look at the most common joke I am seeing today, or at least this past week, and that is we either don't have enough rules for Spelljammer combat, or we don't have any rules at all for ship-to-ship combat within the Spelljammer setting. We have plenty, actually. Really, the joke has just gotten old, it's stupid, it doesn't make any sense. We got the rules, we have plenty of them, and the best part is we only need the one book. I am going to mention a couple other books in this video that have ship-to-ship combat, but they're not entirely necessary for the purposes that we are covering for today. We're just going over the rules as written for combat in your spell-jamming vessel. And really, the Astral Adventurer's Guide is all you need, like I just said. But there are other books out there for additional rulings for Spelljammer combat. Or at least it would help Spelljammer combat, fleshing out certain rules and adding some more fun to your ship-to-ship combat. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and open up our Astral Adventurer's Guide to page 17 to see how spelljamming works. Spelljamming is the act of using a spelljamming helm to propel and maneuver a ship. The individual that operates the helm is called a spelljammer. Alright, so far very simple. You use the spelljammer helm to operate your ship, instead of using oars and rudders like in the Ghost of Saltmarsh book. So, simple enough, really. Let's go ahead and take a look at the spelljamming helm. On pages 22 and 23, we have the following rules. The newest spell, creating spelljamming helm. It has the components of verbal, somatic, and material. The material component is a crystal rod worth 5,000 gold pieces, which the spell consumes. Holding the rod used in the casting of the spell, you touch a large or smaller chair that is unoccupied. The rod disappears, and the chair is transformed into a spelljamming helm. Very nice. This is a 5th level spell, so you get this pretty late in the game, probably around, for most casters, around 12th level, I believe. For the Artificer, that is going to be very late in the game, I think around 17th level when I last checked. But anyway, let's see about the Spelljamming Helm itself. The function of this ornate chair is to propel and maneuver a ship of which it has been installed through air, space, and water, or underwater, provided the ship is built for such travel. The ship in question must weigh 1 ton or more. While attuned to a spelljamming helm and sitting in it, you gain the following abilities for as long as you maintain concentration, as if concentrating on a spell. So that does give us some limiting factors, and I actually had this question before reading this. Could you use certain spells to help you maneuver through space on your spelljamming vessel? And according to this, you technically can, as long as it's not a spell that requires concentration. So you gotta keep that in mind. So I guess the shield spell would be a good spell to use. Well, really just anything that isn't concentration. So long as you're concentrating on your helm, you cannot concentrate on a spell. Seems good? Alright, let's continue. So the effects are as follows. You can use the Spelljamming Helm to move the ship through space, air, or water up to the ship's speed. Okay. If the ship is in space and no other objects weighing 1 ton or more are within 1 mile of it, you can use the Spelljamming Helm to move the vessel fast enough to travel 100 million miles in 24 hours. Pretty neat. And I did see a video by, what was his name? Kyle Hill? The science guy. He actually did a science video on space travel in Dungeons & Dragons. I recommend checking it out. It was pretty good viewing. Anyway, moving on. You can steer the vessel, albeit in somewhat clumsy fashion, in much the way that a rudder or oars can be used to maneuver a seafaring vessel. So like I said earlier, we can do that. That's nice. But that does bring up a valid point. And this is just a clarification of rules. This is not something you technically need, like I said when we first started. Let's go ahead and move on over to Ghosts of Saltmarsh, as well as sticking to the Astral Adventurer's Guide on pages 26-27, while we look at Ghosts of Saltmarsh, pages 86 and 87. Because we do have actual stat blocks for ships in that book. And furthermore, according to the Astral Adventurer's Guide, we have certain stats for their ships. And this is what's going to help us a little bit. Certain ships within Astral Adventurer's Guide are very similar to the ships that we can see in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. For example, I have here the Galley's stat block with some minute changes to it that are given to us by the Astral Adventurer's Guide for the ship known as the Bombard. They are very similar, and there's only a few things that I changed. Everything else is the same. If you're wanting some actual homebrew ships, I would recommend checking out my video on Under Siege to have a full in-depth guide on how attacking non-creatures works, or even defending a non-creature, so objects and structures. That will have a full in-depth guide on that. It'll cover everything that you're seeing on this stat block, from an object's armor class to their damaged threshold, as well as other things that are necessary for a ship to be created. So I want you to keep that video in mind. But everything here is really all you need for a ship. So we'll go ahead and leave that behind. Back over to the Astral Adventurer's Guide on page 21, we have the ruling Weightlessness. This is for when you're trying to jump from your ship to another ship, just so we're clear. In any location where gravity isn't present, so off of your spell-jamming vessel, the following rules apply. Impeded melee. When making a melee attack with a weapon, a creature that doesn't have a flying or swimming speed, either natural or provided by magic, has disadvantage on the attack roll unless the weapon deals piercing damage. This is very similar to the underwater combat rules from the Dungeon Master's Guide, I think. Or is it the Player's Handbook? I can't remember which one it was. Anyway, not important. Secondly, movement. A creature can use an action to push off something heavier than itself and move up to its walking, flying, or swimming speed in a straight line. The creature continues along this course, moving in a straight line at its speed on each of its turns until something stops it or changes its trajectory. This is where the encumbrance rules would come in handy. Now, if you're not into weight and encumbrance, then ignore this section. But the carrying capacity and encumbrance rules would actually help this section a lot, because that adds more weight to the player character. And the more weight they have, the heavier object they need to push off of in order to propel themselves forward. Make sense? Awesome. Moving on. Pages 24 and 25 of the Astral Adventurer's Guide, we finally come on to the point of this video. Ship-to-ship combat. We have 4 points to go over, so let's go ahead and get straight into it. Starting off with the starting distance. Quote, at the start of an engagement, the Dungeon Master decides how far a ship is from its enemies. 3 possibilities are provided in the starting encounter distance table. The shorter the distance, the less time crews have to load weapons and other preparations. So on the table we have 250 feet. This is long range for ballistas, mangonels, short bows, long bows, and heavy crossbows. At 500 feet, it is long range for longbows, mangonels, and beyond the range of ballistas and crossbows. At 1,000 feet, it is beyond the range of most ranged weapons. Now, you'll probably have the question, what does long range have to do with combat? Very simple. If you look on your weapon sheet and go to the bow, any bow, crossbow or otherwise, you'll see 2 ranges. Your first range is long range. Anything beyond this distance is made at disadvantage when you make your attack roll. The second distance on there is beyond that range. Anything on or past that range is an automatic failure if you try to attack it. No roll, just an automatic fail. We got that? Awesome. Now, initiative. Now, the initiative system that it recommends is side initiative. I went over this briefly in my faster combat video. So if you want a full in-depth look at side initiative, please check out that video. It actually does seem like it could be of use for a ship-to-ship combat scenario, and really, why wouldn't you make things easier on yourself? Moving along to the next point, moving and steering a ship. This one's kind of important. To quote, a spelljammer can use a ship's spelljamming helm to move and steer the ship without using their own actions or movement. On their turn, the spelljammer determines how far the ship moves, up to its maximum speed, and decides whether to approach another ship or put more distance between the two. On its turn, a ship can be turned and reoriented so that all its weapons can aim and fire at any target within range, regardless of where they are situated on the deck. This is very important for combat purposes. This means that you can move the ship as much as you want, so long as you're on the helm, with the addition of being able to use your own actions for other purposes. So you can, for all intents and purposes, move your ship, let's say the Bombard that we used earlier, up to its speed closer to a enemy ship. And then you turn it so that you have easy access, or at least your crew has an easier access point to attack the enemy vessel. Additionally, if, say, an enemy crew member came aboard your ship and is now trying to attack you, you can use your own actions to fight back, so long as you're sitting in your spelljamming helm. So I guess that means you are technically prone, so long as you're sitting in the spelljamming helm? That is a good question. I don't think I actually came across that rule yet. Anyway, moving on to our next point, boarding. When one ship moves to within 5 feet of another ship, the spelljammer or pilot of the moving ship can maneuver it alongside the other ship, enabling creatures to move safely from one ship's deck to the other ship's deck until one of the ships pulls away. A ship that has enough movement can pull alongside another vessel, deploy a boarding party, and then move away, provided the members of the... Oh, looks like my spell check failed dramatically. Of the boarding party took the ready action to position themselves so they can move on to the other vessel when it's close enough. Alright. I don't think I've heard enough people talk about the ready action, so I'm sure your viewers are a little bit confused on what the ready action is. So let's go ahead and take a quick detour and explain the ready action, because this actually makes things a lot easier. Player's Handbook on page 193, Actions in Combat. Ready. Sometimes you want to get the jump on a foe or wait for a particular circumstance before you act. To do so, you can take the ready action on your turn, which lets you act using your reaction before the start of your next turn. First, you decide what perceivable circumstance will trigger your reaction. Then, you choose the action you will take in response to that trigger, or you choose to move up to your speed in response to it. So, the example we have for our own purposes is when the spelljammer is within 5 feet of another spelljammer, you move on to the opposite spelljammer. Easy enough. Moving on. In Ghost of Saltmarsh, on page 196, we have this information about crew members, because what's a ship without a crew? To quote, a ship requires a number of able-bodied sailors to crew it, as specified in its stat block. A crew's skill, experience, morale, and health are defined by its quality score. This score can affect a number of general Ship activities, like the crew's ability to notice threats or contend with hazards. A crew starts with a quality score of +4, but that score varies over time, going as low as -10 and as high as +10. It decreases if the crew takes casualties, suffers hardship, or endures poor health. It increases if the crew enjoys high morale, has good health care, and receives fair leadership. Now, this does have a small bit of necessity for ship combat in some cases, but overall, this is not entirely necessary. But we're going to go ahead and cover it anyway, since it does have some potential for ship-to-ship combat, as well as furthering the depth of a seafaring adventure, or an adventure through the Astral Sea. Alright, so, continuing on page 196, we have the optional rule of loyalty and quality. When dealing with an individual member of the crew, you might find it useful to use the optional loyalty rule from Chapter 4 of the Dungeon Master's Guide to convert the quality score into an individual's loyalty score. Add 10 to the crew's quality score. And then we have mutiny. A poorly led or mistreated crew might turn against its officers once per day if a crew's quality score is less than 0. A captain must make a charisma, intimidation, or persuasion check modified by the crew's quality score. So roll your d20, add your charisma, and then add your quality score. If the check total is between 1 and 9, the crew's quality score decreases by 1. If the check total is 0 or lower, the crew mutinies. They become hostile to the officers and might attempt to kill them, imprison them, or throw them overboard. The crew can be cowed into obedience through violence, combat, or offers of treasure or other rewards. When the DM ends the mutiny, the crew's quality score increases by 1d4. Alright, so, on page 198 of Ghost of Saltmarsh, we also have more combat with ships. So, ships and initiative. A ship rolls initiative using its dexterity and uses its crew's quality score as a modifier to the roll. So not only do you have your normal initiative, but you also get your crew's quality score on top of that. That is very nice, in my opinion. If your crew is not good quality, then your ship's a little slower. If you got high quality, you're moving pretty darn fast. Special officer actions. Take aim. As an action, the captain, first mate, or bosun directs the crew's firing, aiding and aiming one's ship's weapons. Select one of the ship's weapons that is within 10 feet of the officer. It gains advantage on the next attack roll it makes before the end of the ship's next turn. Holy cow, that's awesome. Finally, crew in combat. Managing a ship's entire crew in combat can prove cumbersome, especially as larger ships often host dozens of sailors. You can assume that the crew is evenly divided among the upper 2 decks of the ship. Yeah. Makes sense. Helps you with placing your crew. And there are a couple of other rules also on this page that help with crew in combat. So, what about descent into Avernus? Because I did mention it in the intro of this video. Well, I kinda sort of lied about that. You technically don't need Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus to add a few more rules. really, the only reason you would use Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus is for your upgrades. As the meme goes, upgrades, people, upgrades! Yeah, so both Ghost of Saltmarsh and Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus have additional rulings for improving your ship. Whether that be increasing the AC, increasing the speed, increasing the damage output from your weapons, maybe even having some decoration pieces. Or, in the case of Baldur's Gate, having some vehicles to deploy from your ship so that you're not flying through space willy-nilly, you're actually propelling yourself on another vessel. So this is actually useful. Not necessary, but very useful. Not to mention, it does give your players something to spend their gold on for the adventure. Upgrade the ship. You got your hull, which is your armor. You got your movement, which with the spelljamming vessel, the spelljamming helm, you technically don't have oars or rudders. So, and you don't have sails either. So that kind of makes it useless. But the weapons upgrades are pretty useful, as well as the figurehead and miscellaneous upgrades. Those are nice. Not to mention that the upgrades that can be found in Baldur's Gate technically are for your infernal machines, but they could be useful for designing an infernal-inspired spelljamming ship. At least in my opinion. And with that, that is all the time I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any Spelljammer Setting questions, please put them in the comment section down below. I will do my best to answer any questions you have. But with that being said, I have another video to prepare for. We're doing plasmoids on Thursday. Until then, this has been Drahon, and I am offline.